What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Bob's Garage, and today I'm going to teach you how to remove a clock spring from your B5 Audi S4. The first step in working on your clock spring is to always disconnect your car battery. The clock spring is related to your airbag system, and you do not want your airbags to go off when you're not expecting them to, or, well, ever. So, all you do is, this is just a 10mm connection on the negative lead, and I can't quite get my socket down in there, so I'm just going to go the couple steps further and remove this trim piece here. Now I can get my socket in there. Okay, there we go. Okay, the next step is to remove the horn cover here, which is on the front of the steering wheel, and there's just two hex bolts on the back side of the steering wheel, and these are T27 star bolts, or Torx bits, Torx bolts. And underneath this cover, basically the cover that you use to honk your horn, is your airbag. So that's another reason why we wanted to disconnect the battery first. Right. It almost looks like there's keepers that hold those T27 bolts in place. I can't seem to easily remove them, so I'll just leave those in the steering wheel. Alright, next up we have our airbag connection. And let me see if I can get a closer look here. Okay, so here's your steering wheel. Those two bolts that I mentioned were back here and back here on the back side. So those are removed. Alright, let's try to get this airbag disconnected. So to physically unplug this, we're just going to pinch the sides of this connector here. And I don't think I'm going to be able to do it with one hand, so let me remount the camera here. Okay, so here we have the airbag disconnected, and it actually fell out. And you can, I know it's blurry, but you can kind of see there's like a gold pin glistening. It looks like that pin is bent out of place. So, I guess that could be a reason too the airbag wasn't working. Alright, so all that's left now is the black connector here at the top. And if you follow the wires around, it looks like that is what feeds our Tiptronic buttons on the actual steering wheel itself. So it plugs into the clock spring up there, and it goes down to here to a splitter, and it runs over to these sets of buttons, and then it goes along the back over to this set of buttons. So we're just going to disconnect this here. Now, on the replacement clock spring that I got, they had just literally just snipped the wire here, and so I had to unplug that black connector from the clock spring. The problem or the issue that I had unplugging it is, like all these other German connections, it was kind of complicated to do. So what wondering if I should disconnect it here, and then I can disconnect it from the clock spring once I pull the clock spring out. Maybe I'll just do that. So this looks like a much easier connector to handle. So let me try that. Okay, and it's disconnected. So I just squeezed this tab and pulled out, and I'm going to show you how to remove this once I get the clock spring out. So right now, for the most part, it looks like I can pull the steering wheel off. This short wire will stay attached to the clock spring, and we'll go from there. Okay, I realize the lighting isn't the best for this video, so I apologize for that. But we're looking at the center of the steering wheel here. Down in the middle there is a special Torx bolt or fitting. And what I'm going to use for this is a T55 socket. And it goes all the way in there. Now this bolt, I want to say, is held on with like 90 Newton meters of force, which is kind of a lot. So what you're going to want to do is make sure you don't have your keys in your ignition. Make sure your steering wheel itself is locked. And I failed to mention this before, but you preferably want your steering wheel and your car tires straight. That'll help with realigning everything when we put it back together. But you're going to want the steering wheel locked, because we're going to put a full-size socket on here and probably a breaker bar to break this free. But this is a T55. I have a rather large mechanic set of tools, and mine did not have this specific socket in it. So if you're kind of doing groundwork to figure out what you're going to need to make this happen or to do this job, you're going to need a T55 socket. So just be aware of that. So I'll put the camera further back and show you how I break this free. Okay, so we have our T55 socket in the center of the steering wheel. We have our ratchet on there. And what I'm installing here is just a piece of conduit pipe. So I slid that over my ratchet, and we're just going to lefty-loosey it. Okay, and there you have it. It's got some blue Loctite on it. And then this just pulls off. We're going to feed that wire connector through the opening for it. And there's your Tiptronic S4 steering wheel. Alright, so the next step is to drop the steering column locking bar. This is what allows you to tilt and angle the steering wheel. And we're going to pull it all the way out. There you go. Okay. Okay, the next step is to remove the two bolts here and here, and these are just T25, and these are on the locking lever itself. So first thing we did was extend the whole column out, and now we're going to remove these two bolts. I'm going to flip the lever down and pull it off. Next step is to remove the two Phillips screws that are coming from the bottom. This is what separates the clamshell of the upper cover to the bottom cover, or the lower cover. So here's one screw. And here's the other screw. And I didn't want to forget to mention, but once you remove your steering wheel, don't play with the clock spring. Don't spin it around, don't mess around with it, and also basically if you go around more than once, it'll break the clock spring. So if you're trying to, for some reason, to remove your clock spring and it's functional and good, don't play with it. Keep it in the same orientation. Okay. Now we should be able to remove the upper cover here. All that I just did was pop this little trim piece closer to the dash or instrument cluster. Okay, it says just remove this upper trim piece. There you go. Might be better to turn this lever down and then it'll slide out. And there. Okay, the next step is there's two screws we're going to remove. We want to remove this lower panel here. So there's two screws, one here, and then there's a hex screw down below, which is the same I want to say that's T25. That's what we had used before. So these screws on the face of the clock spring, those are just Phillips screws, Phillips screwdriver. And the hex screw is straight up from the bottom here. So those two screws and one hex bolt are what hold this lower cover in place. Okay. From there, it should remove Okay. So it's going to take a little bit of wiggling to get this lower trim piece removed, mainly because it wants to get hung up on your ignition. So where you put your key into the ignition, it's sticking out. Okay, so it looks like if I pull it down and out, alright, looking pretty good. It looks like I just pulled out the ignition shroud here. Let's pop that back into place. Okay. And the whole point of removing that locking pad was so that this could key out here. Okay, so here's a close-up look of the clock spring, and I'm already noticing in this window here, right up there, what color is that? Is that red? So that means there's a problem with the clock spring. I think that means it's misaligned or it's sprung. So to get the actual clock spring released or removed from the steering column, there's like 4 plastic catches. There's 1, 2, 1 over here, 3, and then 4. See if I can show it. Right there. So I'm just going to take a little small straight edge screwdriver and pry those catches free. And you can kind of see the one there. This is looking straight down. There's 2. And it's going to be hard to see, but here's 3 next to the ignition. And then 4 is up from below here. So let's do it. Oh, broke that one. Okay, there we go. Then all that's left is to disconnect these cables here, and we're going to mount back in the new ones. So from my understanding, this is the clock spring, which also houses the steering angle sensor. So you'll see that it might be hard to tell from the video, but there's actually 3 wire connections going into the back side of the clock spring. So 1, 2, 3. So 2 are black, 1's yellow. And then coming out the front, there's only 2. So 1 has this wire cable plugged into it. The other one is already disconnected. That was the one that the airbag went into. So there's 2 on this side, but 3 on that side. So I want to say the third one is for the steering angle sensor. So I'm curious to see how this works. I might end up having to recalibrate the steering angle sensor, which would make for a great video. I actually had to do that before when I replaced my heater core a little over a year ago, but I never made a video on how to calibrate a steering angle sensor. So I'm sure someone's going to need to do that or know how to do that at some point, and it's a rather interesting process how to calibrate the steering angle sensor, but we'll see what happens. So let's just disconnect these here if we can. So there you go. So it was on the steering wheel like this, right about there. And now it's removed. This is the bad one. Okay, so I'm just performing the reassembly here. Everything's going pretty straightforward. If you have any problems getting the trim pieces, the upper or lower trim pieces installed, what you can do is make sure that your locking lever down here is unlocked, and then you can pull on and move around the steering column to kind of better wiggle in everything. So what I noticed was I couldn't get the top trim piece back on, so I had to unlock it, grab the entire steering column and pull it out more. Even though it started out, that was the first step I said to do, it must have pushed back in from wiggling it and playing with it and frying it and everything. So, and then be very careful that this doesn't spin around. If it does, mine moved a little bit. There's an arrow, might be hard to see, but here, make sure it's pointing about to that screw. So I noticed that once you put the trim piece on, that window is covered, so I can't tell if it tripped. I pray to God it didn't, but no, it should be good. So just get that arrow pointed to this screw right in there, and you should be good to go. So I just need to put the, what else? The steering wheel back on and the airbag, and that's about it. So stay tuned. Okay, one more note. It looks like I misspoke in the last clip here. So I said to align that arrow to the screw. You're actually going to want to align it to where that window went, so that these two posts are side by side, and that lines up with the holes for the steering wheel. So that makes everything straight and vertical. So here, I'll show you what I mean. Like that. So now the steering wheel is perfect. Alright, so I just hooked up the battery. I got the steering wheel back in place here. I don't have my keys on me, but I just had an idea. No! No horn. Okay, well, let me go get the keys and see what happens. Alright, so I just started up the car, first time starting it, and after I started it, now I can honk the horn. So that's a good sign. I still have an airbag light, and my traction control and ABS light is on. So I kind of expected that a little bit. I'm booting up the old laptop now to kind of figure it out, but I'm guessing I'm going to have to recalibrate the steering angle sensor, or possibly just clear the errors in BCDS. So I'll figure that out and let you know what the engine, or what the check engine lights are for. These CELs are for, but the horn working is just a really good sign. So, and just as a function check, seems like everything works. So I'm gonna have to do a test drive and all that stuff, but we're looking good. Alright, so that's how you remove and replace a broken clock spring on a B5 Audi. Now, after I started up the car, I do now have a functional horn, and I was able to get the airbag light to shut off. To get the airbag light to shut off, I did have to clear the CEL in VCDS, so it wouldn't just turn off on its own. For the horn to work, I think I showed you, but I had to turn the car on, or start the car, and then it finally worked. So it didn't like initialize the horn until then.